Hey, welcome back to TOEFL Speaking. Today we're going to look at the last TOEFL Speaking Task, which is Task 6. We're going to look at a little method or a sort of structure and some suggested vocabulary to complete that task. Then we're going to listen to an audio, take some notes, prepare a response. You're going to record your response, and then I'm going to let you listen to a sample response. Okay, so Integrated Speaking Task 6, Summarize Lecture. So what you'll need for this lesson, as usual, you're going to need a pen and paper to take some notes as you listen, and your mobile phone with your sound recorder ready to go, because you're going to record your answer so you can listen back and then compare it to our sample response. So what do you have to do for this task? Well, it's a summarized lecture, so you're going to listen to a lecture. The lecture is going to be an academic topic. You don't need to have any knowledge of the topic because all the information you need is going to be given in the lecture. You'll need to take notes as you listen. You'll be given 30 seconds to prepare, and then you'll need to summarize the lecture in 60 seconds. So the timing of this task, the audio will be about a minute to a minute and a half long. Again, 30 seconds preparation time and 60 seconds speaking time. And you'll be recording your answer. As soon as the lecture finishes, you'll be given 30 seconds. And as soon as that 30 seconds is up, the audio recording will begin. So, note-taking. As I showed you last time, you want to try to sort of divide your notes into two. So, main ideas on the left and details on the right. So what you'd want to start with is the topic, which is what the lecture is about. And then the first main point with its associated details on the right, and then the second main point and the details on the right. So taking notes in this way really helps you to structure the information and organize your ideas into a very coherent and logical presentation. So how do you prepare your response? Well, first thing you do is answer the prompt. And the prompt for the summarized lecture task looks something like this. Using dot points and examples from the lecture, describe the theories discussed by the professor. So as you can see, you're only using information from the lecture. So that means you don't have to include any external knowledge of the subject. You don't even have to have ever heard of the subject before. As I said earlier, everything you need is going to be in the lecture. So a structure could look something like this to your answer. So first thing is introduce the topic. So the lecture is about. Then introduce the first main idea, followed by the supporting details, and the second main idea, followed by the supporting details. So you can see how the structure of the presentation relates directly to your notes. Some suggested vocabulary when preparing your response to this task. So to introduce the lecture, you can say something like, the lecture is about. So the lecture is about birds of paradise, the lecture is about classical music, so whatever is the topic. Then the professor illustrates this concept by using two main points. So this is a great way to introduce the two main points that the lecture discusses. Firstly, he or she talks about, here's the main point. He or she says that, and then here are your details. Secondly, he or she speaks about, second main point. He or she notes that, and then your details. So this is a really nice way to structure your presentation using some nice vocabulary. So here you're introducing the topic, here you're introducing the two main points, and then words like firstly and secondly really help the listener to follow your presentation and give it a nice sort of structure. So let's get ready to practice. Listen and take notes. So here's your lecture.
Since the time of the Renaissance, the identity of one of the greatest playwrights of all time, William Shakespeare, has been constantly questioned. There is still an ongoing controversy between Shakespeare's devoted admirers and anti-Stratfordians, who claim that this illustrious person is nothing more than just a fiction, due to a number of reasons, such as a lack of documentary evidence of Shakespeare being real, discrepancy of the author's education and writing manner, and numerous similarities found in works of Shakespeare and his contemporaries. One of the main reasons for planting the seed of doubt concerning Shakespeare's identity is the fact that very little is known of the playwright's personal life. There are no letters, diaries, or authenticated portraits, except ones painted after his death. The records of William Shakespeare from Stratford are rather rare and are attributed mostly to Shakespeare as a real estate owner or an actor. There can be found only 6 of William's signatures on literary works, but the name is spelled differently from the one that appears on most Shakespeare title pages. For a great number of scholars engaged in Shakespeare's mystery, these facts are the grounds for presupposing that the name was used as a pseudonym for some other author. Another reason to consider Shakespeare to be a myth is an odd inconsistency observed between his education and style of writing. Anti-Stratfordians tend to think that William's humble origins and obscure life cannot be compatible with his poetic eminence. The author creates an impression of a highly educated person with a great experience of traveling, knowledge of foreign languages and court life. But at the same time, there is not even an official document proving that William Shakespeare from Stratford attended school and was literate. For many anti-Stratfordians, the absence of evidence is taken to be evidence of absence.
Okay, how was that? Were you able to take notes as you listened? And if so, how did you find the note-taking experience? So if you have any questions about note-taking, feel free to ask them now. So it's important to remember as you're listening and taking notes, you've got to sort of write and continue to listen at the same time because you don't want to miss any important information. So try to keep your notes really short. Avoid writing full sentences and abbreviate your words so you don't even have to write full words. And you can use symbols as well, as long as whatever symbols you're using or abbreviations that you can understand them. Also, try to listen out for sort of keywords or transitions in the lecture. So if the lecturer says something like next or and or also, these are sort of transitions from one main idea to the next. So these are kind of helpful cues for you. Okay, let me bring up my presentation again. And I'll give you some time to prepare your response. Okay, so in the test, after you hear the audio, a prompt will appear on the screen and you're also going to hear it read to you. So here it is. Using points and examples from the lecture, describe the theories discussed by the professor. So to prepare, you want to use the information from your notes and the suggested structure of introducing the topic. So what was the lecture about? Summarize the first main point and give some examples from the lecture. And then summarize the second main point supported with examples from the lecture. So you're going to have 30 seconds to do this and your time starts now. Okay, time's up. So 30 seconds isn't a lot of time, and it may not be enough time for you to actually write anything. I used my 30 seconds of preparation time when I did the test to actually just look over my notes and then write sort of numbers. So 1, 2, 3, just for my reference. So when I was speaking, I could easily follow my notes or easily follow the information that I had written. And you also want to try to avoid reading when you're giving your presentation. Okay, so your notes are really sort of there as a guide. You're not going to have time to write out a full response in 30 seconds. Okay, we are now at the speaking time. So grab your phone and get your recorder ready. All right, you can start recording your response now. And that's 60 seconds. All right, how did you find that? I always think it's a useful exercise to record your response because listening back to yourself, you can really learn a lot. So as you listen back to yourself, you can say, well, that sounded quite confusing, or maybe I could structure my talk better by using words like firstly and secondly. Maybe I mumbled my words. Maybe I was speaking too quickly. So a lot of the time when you're nervous, you either slow your words down or you speed them up. So listening to yourself back, you can hear things that you wouldn't have noticed otherwise. So it's always a good thing to sort of listen to yourself. And also each week you're recording your responses and hopefully you're keeping them. So you should have 6 of them now. And, you know, sort of listen back to the first one and compare that to this one and see, have you noticed any improvement? Are you feeling more confident and comfortable with the task? Okay, let me check and see. Are there any questions so far? Okay, let's now look at a sample response. Get my slides up. Okay. So firstly, I'm going to show you some sample notes. So as you can see, my notes are brief, okay? I haven't written full sentences. The topic is the true identity of Shakespeare. So I've just written ID because it saves me time. The first point that the lecturer makes is historical reference. So there's no evidence of Shakespeare's personal life. All references to him are as a landowner or actor, not as a playwright. The lecturer mentioned that there are 6 signatures that are remaining of Shakespeare, but they have different spelling on the title pages, and also suggests that possibly Shakespeare's name was used as a pseudonym by other writers. The second point that the professor makes is education. So the writing of Shakespeare is very sophisticated and, you know, is equivalent to a high level of education, but there's no evidence that Shakespeare was educated, okay, or any evidence of his literacy. So how do your notes look in comparison to this? Are they clearly organized? Have you shortened your words? Have you written full sentences? So just a little short comparison of your notes to mine. Okay, moving on to a sample structure. So I would introduce the lecture, which talks about the true identity of Shakespeare. Then I would introduce the historical evidence of Shakespeare's identity and talk about personal life, historical references to his status as a landowner and actor. I would mention the 6 signatures, and I would mention the possibility of a pseudonym. Then I would introduce the second point of evidence of Shakespeare's education. The details would be related to lack of evidence of Shakespeare's education, and that this does not correspond with the sophistication of Shakespeare's writing. Okay, so now I'm going to put all of that together into a sample response, and I'll play that for you now.
The lecture is about the true identity of William Shakespeare. The professor illustrates his concept using 2 main points. Firstly, she talks about the fact that there is not much known Shakespeare's personal life. She says that any historical references to him are as a landowner or actor, not as a playwright. Only 6 of his works has his signature, and each one is spelled differently to the name of the title page. Some theorists believe that his name was a pseudonym for another author due to some similarities found in his work and that of other authors of his time. Secondly, she speaks about inconsistencies between Shakespeare's education and his writing. She notes that his sophisticated writing is evidence of a high level of education. However, there is no evidence that Shakespeare was educated or even literate. The lecture is about
what did you think of that
William
response?
Shakespeare.
And how do you
The professor
compare it to your
illustrates his
own?
concept using 2
Something to
main
think
points.
about.
Firstly, she talks about the fact that there is
I'll show you now the transcript for that. And I've highlighted in red the suggested vocabulary. So the lecture is about the true identity of William Shakespeare. The professor illustrates this concept using 2 main points. Firstly, she talks about the fact that there is not much known about Shakespeare's personal life. She says that any historical reference to him are as a landowner or actor, not as a playwright. Only 6 of his works has his signature, and each one is spelled differently to the name on the title page. Some theorists believe that his name was a pseudonym for another due to some similarities found in his work and that of other authors of his time. Secondly, she speaks about inconsistencies between Shakespeare's education and his writing. She notes that his sophisticated writing is evidence of a high level of education. However, there is no evidence that Shakespeare was educated or even literate. Okay, so you can compare that sample response to your own, and hopefully you can see that the suggested vocabulary is there to really guide your response, to almost sort of remind you of what are you supposed to be saying. So this is something to sort of remember and keep in mind during your practice. So let's take a look at the criteria here. So let's look at 4 and let's think about the response that you heard or the sample student that you just heard. To get a 4, that student needs to have achieved all of the following. So all of these 3 points. He needs to have given well-paced delivery, meaning not too fast and not too slow, with clear pronunciation. So you should have been able to understand pretty much every word. Effective use of grammar and vocabulary, with some minor errors, but these errors didn't affect the meaning. So even though there were some mistakes maybe in grammar and vocab, you still understood him. And thirdly, a well-developed response with a clear progression of ideas. So this means that the speaker began with an introduction, introduced the second point, supported it with examples, and then introduced the first point, and then the second point. Okay, so basically structure. So do you think the speaker met all of those 3 points? And if so, then you'd give the speaker a 4. Let's take a look at 3. generally clear speech with minor pronunciation difficulties, meaning that you could understand almost everything, but there are a couple of words here or there that understanding was impeded due to pronunciation issues. Effective use of grammar and vocabulary with some imprecision that may affect fluency, meaning that there were a few mistakes that affected the fluency of the speech, so that the speaker had to sort of stop and correct himself, or maybe cause a little bit of misunderstanding for the listener. And mostly coherent response, but some ideas lacked elaboration, meaning that although it was well organized, maybe there wasn't enough supporting evidence or examples, or there was a lack of clear relationship between the ideas. So I'm not going to go into 2 and 1 because this was a high level response. So taking a look at these 3 points in 4 or these 3 points in 3, what do you think you would give that speaker? So I'm going to take a look at your responses. And while you're thinking, I'm going to answer a question. So what should I do if I don't understand parts of the listening? The main thing is don't freak out or get nervous or lose your confidence if there's something you don't understand. Keep listening and keep writing because there's going to be things that you do understand, and always focus on that. Okay, so try not to focus on what you don't understand because that's going to cause you to shut down and lose confidence, and you want to avoid that. So focus on what you do understand and bring that into your response. Okay, there's always going to be something that you do understand out of the whole lecture. And so you really sort of want to draw on that. Now, you don't have to mention everything in your response. So you're not sort of repeating the entire lecture. You just think of a summary as, let's just say you heard a lecture or you heard, some interesting information, and you're meeting a friend for coffee afterwards, and you want to say to your friend, you know what, I just heard something really interesting about Shakespeare that I didn't know before. Some people think that actually he didn't exist. And there are 2 reasons why they think that. Firstly, there's no evidence in history that he existed. There's some discrepancies or inconsistencies with historical reference. And also, they don't think that Shakespeare was very educated. So if he wasn't educated, how could he write all of those wonderful, plays that he wrote? So you're really sort of recapping the main ideas. Try not to think about it as you have to understand everything and repeat everything, okay? Take the gist. And so what is gist? Gist is basically the overall meaning of what the professor is trying to say. So hopefully that answers your question. Any other questions? So think about the response that you heard. What did you think about that? So there's no right or wrong answer. This is just a discussion. So feel free to give any comments related to that. And also remember, as long as you sort of fill the 60 seconds with valuable information. So you want to try to avoid going round in circles and repeating yourself to fill that 60 seconds. The point is not to speak for a minute with repetitive, with a repetitive answer. The point is to try to sort of give a well-developed, coherent answer. And even if that's only 45 seconds, that's better than speaking for 60 and sort of just, rambling. Okay, so stick to what you know and stick to what you could understand. Okay, so another question, what if we couldn't cover all points? So let me go back to my notes and Let's take a look. So the two main ideas that the lecturer discusses related to Shakespeare's true identity is history. So within history, there's no evidence of Shakespeare's personal life. She mentioned something about signatures. And then she mentioned something about, well, there's no evidence that Shakespeare ever was educated, so that he even went to school, for example. So these are the two main points. Now, if you don't mention them, let's just say you skip the second one and you only mention the first point. If we look at the rubric, and it says here under 3, mostly coherent response, but some ideas lack elaboration. Well, that means that you mentioned all the points, but maybe didn't develop them. So let's now look at 2. Response is connected to the task. So yes, you do talk about the task. So you summarize the lecture, saying that it's about Shakespeare's true identity, but some ideas are limited or repetitious. So meaning you don't discuss all of the ideas, and the ones that you do discuss, you tend to repeat. Okay, so then if you don't cover all of the points, it may bring your score down. So to achieve a 3, you need to achieve at least 2 in this category. So let's just say your speech is generally clear and your grammar and vocabulary are generally good, even though there's some mistakes, they don't affect your fluency. But maybe you didn't cover all the points. Well, that's okay. You can still get a 3 because the key here is that you achieved at least 2 of the following. Okay, so there's still hope for you, even if you don't cover all the points, as long as your speech is clear and your grammar and vocabulary are sort of at a higher level with very few errors. So hopefully that answers that question. Okay, how can you record your response? Well, on test day, the thing starts to record automatically. So you're going to have your headset on as soon as the speaking sort of test starts. It'll introduce the speaking test to you. It'll give you all of the instructions. And then it'll start to play the audio recordings and you'll be able to listen and take notes. As soon as the recording is finished, the prompt will appear on your screen. And also you're going to hear a narrator narrating the prompt to you. Then you're going to be given your timed preparation and you're going to be able to see the time on the screen. As soon as that preparation time is finished, it automatically starts recording. So you don't have to press record. You don't have to do anything. It'll automatically start to record. And it'll actually tell you, you record, or you may begin to speak now. It'll give you some kind of indication. And then you speak, and then it automatically stops recording at 60 seconds. So it's very guided. It guides you throughout the whole thing. There are no surprises because in your headset, the narrator is going to be telling you step by step what you need to do. Okay. So yeah, I wouldn't say the speaking test is hard because they make it quite easy. Okay, they make it quite easy. They support you throughout every step of the way. The only thing that you need to really do is focus on the listening and the note-taking, and go in there prepared with some vocabulary and really sort of understanding what each section of the speaking test is about. Okay, so practice. So somebody's asked about hesitant tone. So yeah, sometimes when we're nervous or sometimes when we're trying to think about what to say, we hesitate, and that might affect our pace of speech. Let me bring back the rubric again. So we can see here in 3, generally clear speech with minor pronunciation difficulties. Doesn't really mention pace here. But if we look at 4, well-paced delivery with clear pronunciation, meaning that there's no issue with your pace whatsoever. So when we heard our sample response, our speaker, his pace was quite, what's the word? It was well paced. He didn't have any hesitations. He didn't have any pauses. So that's what you'd like to achieve. However, it's kind of realistic. When they're listening to you, it's realistic. They understand that you don't always speak, without hesitation. Hesitation is a natural part of speech in real life, and it certainly is a natural part of speech when you're recording a timed response for a test. So they're not expecting absolute perfection. Okay, as long as there isn't really sort of long pauses or lots of stops and starts. Okay, so yeah, it doesn't have to be perfect. All right, any other questions related to the summarized lecture task? What I would do in preparation for the summarized lecture task is listen to as many lectures as you possibly can. So TED.com, which probably you're familiar with, that's a really great source for speeches and lectures and lots of interesting topics. So I suggest you listen to, maybe 3 or 4 lectures a day. They don't have to be long. What I might do is actually bring up the website and show you. So you should also, as you listen to your TED Talk, practice taking notes. So TED.com. So what you can do is you can choose your topics. So if you're interested in technology, entertainment, design, business, science, there's also a larger, sort of more detailed choice there. So the TOEFL tends to deal with things like anthropology, tends to deal with things like history. If you can find history here, it tends to deal with things like art. So you want to watch kind of like TOEFL-y related topics. And then you can also pick your duration. So I'd stick to short videos between 0 to 6 minutes, because in the TOEFL test, the lectures are usually under 2 minutes, right? So here, all of the lectures related to the topic that you chose that are under 6 minutes are going to come up. And as you listen to these lectures, so pick whichever ones you're interested in, as you listen to them, take notes, because note-taking is an essential skill for the TOEFL. And then what you might want to do after you listen to the lecture and take your notes, use your notes to either record a summary or speak to your husband, wife, girlfriend, boyfriend, friend, roommate, colleague, and maybe talk to them about the lecture that you listened to. I listened to a really interesting lecture on TED today about human robots or humanoid robots. The lecture talked about point 1, point 2, point 3, and that's it. There's your summary. The more that you do that, the more you're going to be prepared for this task and the more comfortable you're going to feel. It's also going to help you with vocabulary. The more you listen, the more you hear new words, the more you're able to use new words in your speaking. So I think that's a great resource, and I would really encourage you guys to use that one. And we've all got time. We've all got, 6 minutes a day to listen to a lecture. Oops. Okay, any questions? Do any of you use TED already? Do any of you use that website or have watched lectures on that website? Yeah, so it's really good, really great learning resource. And the great thing about it is that you can also download the transcripts. So if you've listened to the lecture and you've taken your notes and you're still not really sure, you can actually download the transcript of the lecture and compare your notes to the transcript. But remember, use your notes to speak a summary. You can either record your summary on your phone and listen back to it, or as I said, use it as a discussion point with anybody in your social circle to really sort of practice your speaking. So remember, these skills are integrated. That's what the TOEFL is about. Integrating listening with speaking, integrating reading with speaking, writing with speaking. So using all of these skills together. And the more you practice, the more comfortable and confident you're going to feel. And the more you're going to learn about lots of interesting things, interesting topics as well. Okay. Thank you guys very much for your questions, and I will see you next week. We have now covered all 6 of the TOEFL speaking tasks. So next week's going to be a big one. We're actually going to have 1 full TOEFL speaking test practice, combining all 6 speaking tasks. So get yourselves ready for that. Okay, in the meantime, have a wonderful week, and I'll see you next time. Bye.